Welcome everyone to the PJ's Cast. I'm your host Pierce, alongside of my good co-host Dylan, and making her return back to the PJ's Cast is Lauren Campbell. How's it going, Lauren?
It's going awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're glad to have you back on. I believe the last time we had you on was back in December, and I remember one of the big points was we are talking about how can the Bruins get better, and I really thought going into that trade deadline they were going to make moves for Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm from Calgary, and ultimately they both went to Vancouver. But come free agency, they're now Boston Bruins, and I think they fit in perfectly as Bruins. And Bruins went on in the second round. And before we do get into the Bruins, I just want to ask you, how has your summer been going so far? Because it was like the game 7 of the Cup final, and then it was like the draft and like free agency all within a week. So I'm just wondering how the summer break has been so far.
It's been good. It's been busy, but I've taken some time to just kind of relax, go on vacation. We take
That's
the big
good.
vacation in April, like right before the playoffs, so we get kind of rested before we go into the busy time. But it's been a nice balance right now, and but now I'm kind of getting that itch to go like let's get training camp started. I'm ready for captain's practices. I'm ready to see the lines and ready to see if Fabian Lysell cracks this roster. So I'm just excited. I'm ready for hockey to come back.
Yeah, it's perfect that you bring up because that's one of the questions I have. But my first question is, do you think the Bruins are better than last year? Because I look at the goaltending. Yeah, you lose a former Vezina Trophy winner in Linus Ullmark, and maybe more importantly, the chemistry that him and Swayman had. The goalie hugs will no longer be a thing, unfortunately. But you got a first round pick back for Ullmark. You got Jonas Corposalo, who, if we're looking at Boston's history of taking on goalies, they've done a good job, and obviously the team defense in front of them. The defense, I think, has gone better. I mean, you still got Charlie McAvoy, who at the worst to me is a top 10 defenseman in the NHL. Elias or Hampus Lindholm, they have on the defense. You got Nikita Zadorov, Brendan Carlos, still very formidable top four. But then I look at the offense. I think the offense has gone a little better. I think their center core is a bit deeper, and obviously you still have guys like David Pasternak and Brad Marchand, even though you lost Jake DeBrusk to Vancouver. So I'm just thinking, do you think the Bruins are better than last year, and do they have a better chance to compete for a cup this year than they did last year?
I think overall, yes, they have gotten better. I think, you mentioned the additions, and yes, you do lose Linus Allmark. And I have no idea how Corpusalo is going to pan out. I have no idea if he's even going to see time with Brandon Bussey, right? Like right knocking right on the doorstep of an NHL debut. So that's really going to be like a big storyline to watch. But I also trust goalie Bob with everything I have in me. I mean, you've mentioned he's done such a good job developing goalies. And you can even add Allmark into that because, yes, he played on a bad Buffalo team. And yes, he was above 500, but he must have seen something in him being like, okay, here's what we can kind of tweak and get him to a level that he hasn't played at before. And he did. So hopefully that's kind of the mindset in getting Corpusalo and even trying to continue to develop Bussy, because that's, if you want him to be part of the future behind Swayman, then you need to see what you really have in him, especially this summer. But yeah, I do think overall they improved. You mentioned the defense, and Zadorov is incredibly difficult to play against in the playoffs. He is a pain in the butt to play against in the playoffs. So I think that's kind of what they were missing there. I mean, they were missing a couple things last year, but when you're up against the cap and you can only do so much with what you have in front of you, I think they did the best they could. But Zadorov is going to be, I think people are really going to love him. Boston fans, I think, are just really just going to love his style of play. And same with Elias Lindholm. I think it's really funny that he's wearing 28 and Hampus Lindholm wears 27. So the Lindholms are going consecutive numbers there. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And I don't think either of them, I know Hampus doesn't. I don't think Elias is going to wear the E on the back of his jersey. So that's going to be a lot of fun, especially someone like
That's the
me who's
important
like
stuff.
very difficult, like hard to see. I wear glasses and being up on the ninth floor, I'm like, okay, that's going to be fun. But I think he adds that true number one center that they were really missing last year. And that's not a knock on Coyle or Zaka or anyone else that has stepped up, Morgan Geeky. That's not a shot at them. It's so hard to play that number one center position. And when you had someone in Patrice Bergeron, and then you had the 1-2 punch with David Krejci for so long, and then you don't have that, it's like we have to step up all of a sudden and play this bigger role, bigger minutes, and Lindholm will come in seamlessly and be able to do that. And hopefully that helps those around him elevate their game. You kind of get Coyle back into the natural position that he's in, and then you can just kind of elevate your wings. You can put Zaka back on the wing. So people just kind of fall into place now, like their natural positions because of the addition of Lindholm.
100%. I think the biggest thing that you pointed out was that, it gives them that flexibility down the middle. You could put Zacha on the wing. You don't have to put Patra in a top 6 role, because I felt like that was kind of necessary last season when he was healthy, which it kind of brings me to my next question. How do you see the centers stacking up? Because I feel like Patra has a case for that second line center spot, but also Coyle had a career high year in goals and points, I think, or maybe just points. But and then, Zacha always had a great year at 1C playing with Pasternak. But like you said, they could just move him to the wing. So I'm just kind of curious how you think the centers stack out come training camp.
Yeah, I think you keep Coyle. I think that Coyle, it's his second line center position to lose. And I think that kind of takes some pressure off Patra, especially coming back in from a major surgery. He did say during development camp he put on some weight. So that's obviously a good thing. He was very small, and because of the hit, I mean, he delivered the hit that made his shoulder, it didn't pop out. I can't remember the exact injury, but when you're on the giving end of the hit, you should be able to absorb, most of it without getting the worst of the injury. So I think that, I think Lindholm will go 1, Coyle 2, Patra 3, and then, you could go Geeky 4. You can kind of mix and match. And that's the beauty of the bottom 6. They're kind of, plug and play and see what works. But I think that putting Patra in the bottom 6 will be really crucial for his development. And, he's not guaranteed a spot on this team. I mean, he could have a terrible camp. I don't see that happening, but I think that he's really motivated, and it takes, like I said earlier, just takes that pressure off of him, and to just kind of develop into a stronger center than he was last year. And if he continues to put on weight and continues to work at his game, that's going to be a difficult 3 center. I mean, it's not going to be, having Bergeron, Krejci, and then Taylor Hall on your third line kind of difficult, but it's, if he can continue to, or if he pans out to be even half the player people expect him to be, that's going to be difficult. And I think this is a big training camp and season coming up for Patra, because he was playing very well last year. And then, he did kind of drop off, but you expect that. But like I said, if you just kind of put him in that bottom 6 role, there's not too much to be expected of him. Of course, there's still expectations. The expectations are high, but you're not putting him in that top 6 role where he can't keep up with some of the players. Maybe he's still trying to figure out his game, and he can have a little more time to still get the NHL minutes and play in not so much of a bigger role that he had last year.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, because obviously he exceeded expectations. I think so. And, he was, I think, 19 or 20, right?
Yeah, 19, yep.
Yeah, it's expected to have some sort of, soft, like not even a sophomore slump, just, rookie ups and downs of your season. And, now there's just enough depth to where it's going to ease him in. You can play him on the power play still. And, he's not going to play these minutes against top line talent. You could put him up against a more favorable matchup, which is always beneficial. I wanted to ask another question, because we were talking about new acquisitions and whatnot. The Boston back end is like the top 6 right now looks really great. You got, McAvoy, you got Lindholm, you got Carlo, you got Zadorov, you got Lohrei, and you got Peak. Excuse me. I just wonder where Zadorov's going to stack up. Is he playing with Carlo? Do you think he's going to play with McAvoy? Where do you think his final slot is going to end up being on that left side?
I think he'll end up playing with Carlo. I think that McAvoy and Lindholm have been good together. But I also think too, this is going to be a big camp for them too, to see kind of what works, the mixing and matching of the pairs. They're all about the same height, which is wild to think that the Bruins went from having people like Matt Grzelcyk and Torrey Krug to having 3 or 4 defensemen who are 6'1" and up. So I think that they have really good size, and that's going to be crucial going into the regular season and then eventually into the playoffs for next year. And I think that I think I would like him with Carlo, because I think Carlo, and we saw a little bit of it last year, really needs to utilize his size more. Like he's a big guy. We've seen him do it. He can certainly make those big hits. And I don't know, I'm not going to say he's scared to do that, because I don't know if he's worried about an injury. I mean, he does have a concussion history, so if he's protecting himself more than anything, but I just like to see him be a bit more physical with that size, because he is 6'5", 6'6", like that's a big boy, and that's somebody that you're going to need. So if he's with somebody who's physical like Zadorov, maybe that will kind of help him push him just a little bit. He doesn't need to be this enforcer kind of defenseman, but he just needs maybe just a little bit of a push to kind of get to a bit more, like I said, using his size to make that hit, not be afraid to just kind of body somebody into the boards if need be.
I feel that was the biggest takeaway for me for the Bruins this offseason. It's like they became more Bruinsy because the Bruins probably have the clearest identity of any team in the NHL. And when I saw them get Zadorov, when I saw him draft, I forget his name, the guy they drafted with their first round pick who's like 6'7", 6'8". I'm like,
Oh,
yeah, they just
Dean.
got more Bruins. Yeah.
Yes. He's just massive, huge guy. And I know I don't expect, I expect a couple years development, like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years. He's young, but yeah, they got very big and they went for size. And I feel like for so long, you had the big bad Bruins, and that's what got them the Stanley Cup in 2011. You got very close in 2013. You got very close in 2019. And they're just missing something there. And maybe it's size. Maybe it's size, a little bit of speed, which you do lose with Jake DeBrusk leaving. But that's the size is so important, which we saw them get outmatched, against the Panthers. Just the Panthers were just like, as soon as
the Panthers.
Oh my God,
yeah.
they were just out. Like they could outgas or outlast their opponents so easily and just make them tired. And I think that now that the Bruins have a bit of size, maybe they can figure that out now and, get back, not necessarily to the big bad Bruins. I mean, that would certainly help them in the long run, but you get that size, you get that physicality, you get that edge that you've been missing, especially in the playoffs for the last few years.
I just look at that team and talking about them playing the Panthers. Yes, they lost to the Panthers, but like they pushed them to 6 games, and
Yeah.
like if they just it's not like they were just an easy pushover. I look at the team. I kind of look at what formula you need to go on a deep run, even go to conference final. I mean, if you get past like a cup final or cup championship, that'd be awesome. But like you have, I would argue, a top 5 goalie in the NHL, if not very close to it, Jeremy Swayman. Even with Allmark gone, like their defense 1 through 6, like you have a true number 1 defenseman with McAvoy. Like I said earlier, like at worst a top 10 guy. The defense is set. I look at the offense. I think it's deeper than last year. You have a game breaker winger with Pasternak, Barry Marchand. Obviously, he's not maybe as good as he was a few years ago, but that's still, someone who could score 70, 80 points. And I look at the center court's better, but I feel they can get maybe another like top 6 center or scorer of any kind. I feel this could be a team that could go on a deep playoff run. With the Bruins, the last couple of years, we've kind of looked at them and said, "Oh, this team is old. Maybe this is the year they fall off." And I've really thought, especially of that last year. And now this year, I feel they're better than they are last year. So if they take a step back, I would almost be more surprised than I would have been in the last couple of years. And they have an older team, but they've had guys, like they have young guys coming up. We talked about Matthew Poitras, and another person you brought it off the top of the show was Fabian Lysell. I remember in his draft year, I was a huge fan of his, and he's took a couple of years in Providence. I think he was almost point per game last year, and I would think he, at least gets a chance to make the team through training camp. What do you think his trajectory looks like? Do you think he could be a regular NHL player, or do you think he maybe needs a little bit more time in Providence before he gets called up?
No, I think he can be an impactful winger for this team. And I think this is a very important training camp. He had a concussion last year, and I think the year before that, he had a concussion that ended his season prematurely. So he's just kind of had bad luck with the injuries. And he admitted that he wasn't feeling 100% when he came back this past season in the playoffs. He played 1 playoff game for Providence, and he said that he was not feeling 100%. So you think with some rest, he didn't go to development camp, which was to be expected. He was just, working on his game. And I think that he's been knocking on the door of an NHL debut for quite some time now. And Don Sweeney even said that had he been healthy, the Bruins would have recalled him toward the end of the season just to give him some looks and see what they have. And I think that, I know people are starting to get impatient with him, but I mean, you draft these players so young, and they might be playing, even though they're playing hockey, it's like a different kind of style. I remember when Krejci, Zacha, and Pasternak were on the line together, they'd always say they played Czech hockey. And while it's essentially the same game, they know exactly what that means to them. And maybe it's just something that's what Lysell needs to kind of figure out and just kind of grow into, being an NHL player. And I think that, like I said, I think he certainly can be an impact player, an impact winger. And I think that's kind of why the Bruins went out in free agency, got their biggest needs on this team, and just kind of got depth pieces, the Max Joneses and
He's
just kind
Bruin.
of he is a Bruin. It's just like
Perfect
just
fit, yeah.
getting those like those depth pieces that not necessarily are the sexiest names out there, but they're going to help you. And I think that in because of how they handled free agency, they're kind of banking on whether it's Lysell or even Georgi Markelov. What do you have in him? He saw some time last year, so I really think that, and I feel like I've said this for a couple of players that we've talked about, but it's an important training camp. And I think Lysell made it difficult until the end last year. He was part of the either the last round of cuts or second to last round of cuts, so he's right there. And obviously the concussions are concerning, but if he just kind of slows down a little bit and just kind of keeps pace with the game and just not necessarily try to get ahead of the play and just kind of play play the puck, play what's in front of you, and just kind of, I think he's getting antsy too. I mean, you're drafted you're drafted high, you have a lot of expectations, and now I think it's the time for him to really prove it, and also time for the Bruins to see what they have. You don't want him turning into another Jack Studnicka where you just bury him in Providence, and then I think he went to Vancouver and ended up getting waived, and just he never really has panned out as an NHL player. You don't want that to happen to Lysell. So I think that they're really counting on him to break into the league and be an impact player, not just somebody who's like, yeah, we'll take him out and play like 6, 7, 8 minutes a night. No, I think that they want him to be, 17, 18 minutes, maybe even more than that, and playing impactful minutes and playing an impactful game.
Yeah,
100%.
a lot of those. I was gonna say a lot of the players from those drafts, like the 2020 draft, 2021 draft, we talked a lot about on our show. Like a lot of their developments have been stumped because of COVID, and then we even see guys that were drafted in later years, like seasons when they were 15, 16-year-olds, they would completely miss it because of COVID. So I feel like we're to have those remnants for like maybe a couple. I don't know entirely, but like you can see the remnants from that for like almost 5 years now, how much of a
Yeah.
ripple effect it's had. And even top end guys, like I think of Lafreniere, who finally broke out this season. He was the first overall pick in 2020, so it took him a few seasons to figure out. Even Quentin Byfield, he's finally hit his stride now, being the second overall pick, and he's got himself a nice contract to boot. And obviously, there's a couple other guys that like kind of took off right away, like Stutzel. But yeah, most of the guys that were drafted in those years takes a little while. And I just kind of looking at the stats, and if he's healthy and good to go, I think this would be the year for Lysell to take the step and be, maybe a middle six winger for them, contributor.
It's a year of sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying that's what I see him as. That's what I think the Bruins see him as. That's what I think they've seen him as. And I think people kind of downplay how much they lost due to COVID. I mean, they lost an entire season, and that really pushes people back. You don't have somewhere to go every day. You don't have somewhere to work out, to skate, and that could really push someone back a year or even more. So, and with his injury history too, it's not all because of development issues. It's because he's had some bad luck. But I really think that this is going to be the season of Fabian Lysell.
Yeah, I was going to say, this seems like the training camp of opportunity for the Bruins. Who's going to grab that brass ring? Guys like Patra and Lysell, there are opportunities there to grab a top 6 role if needed. You look at the back end, like if Mason Lohrei plays the right way out of camp, like he could sneak his way into the top 4 at certain points in the season, because that might benefit Zadorov even more to be on the third pair. That just makes your third pair menacing. That's kind of what the position he's played a majority of his career anyway. I feel like the biggest question mark, like you said earlier, is the goaltending. Not necessarily Swayman. Swayman I'm not worried about. Mainly Korpisalo, and if Bussy's going to come up and, really fill that void. I'm kind of curious as to how long you think Korpisalo's leash is as the backup, because I don't think it's a position to where like Chicago had with Soderblom last year, where you kind of can just let him burn for 20 games. Like he's not getting that amount of time to find his game in Boston, I feel like.
Yeah, I think it'll be a tight leash. I think that, they've mentioned wanting Swayman to play upward of 50 games. He's never done that before, but you want to be able to get him there while also getting him adequate rest. Because I go back to all the playoffs, essentially, when Tuukka was in net, and how he was overplayed during the regular season because they didn't have that adequate backup, and he had to come in and he had to play an absurd amount of games during the regular season and then go right into the playoffs, which is obviously incredibly grueling. So I think that they're going to take that. I think they're going to take that seriously. You don't want to burn out your franchise goalie, and you don't want to put him in a position if, it's 3-4-0 because Korpisalo gives up 4 easy goals, and then put Swayman in, and you're putting him in an impossible position against a hot team. Like, do you just, like, you mentioned with Chicago, like, do you just let him burn out there? I don't think they necessarily have that luxury like they did last year and the year before with Allmark and Swayman, where it's like, oh, okay, like, whatever, it's 4-0, it's an off night for Allmark, we'll get Swayman in the next game, or vice versa. He's coming off a terrible season. I think it's the worst of his career. And I do think you have to take into consideration the teams he's played on. I mean, no offense to the Ottawa Senators, but like, that's just not a team that was good last year. Full offense to the Ottawa Senators. But, I think that is something. And, working with goalie Bob could be the difference for him. So I think between working with goalie Bob, also having Swayman there for you and having that competition, he might need kind of that competition and maybe take his game to the next level. Even if the next level is just like, well, I can't do math. Was there 82 games in a season? So like if he plays 30 games, even if he can just do that and be not, you want it to be more than mediocre because you went and got your number one center. You got a physical defenseman. You don't want to waste winnable games and have that change your seating in the standings, have that burn you out in an important regular season game. I don't want to necessarily say like he'll see probably if he does become the backup, if he earns that backup role when you have like the throwaway games, the getaway games and maybe like matinees, but you don't want to put him in an important game and then have him just get completely blown out and embarrassed and then ruin his confidence going forward. Because we all know it's incredibly mental game too. You're inside your head. We saw it with Jake DeBrusk in 2020 and even 2021 when he requested the trade out of Boston, just how mentally draining it can be when you don't feel like you're playing your best game. So, but I think that the leash will be tight, close by. When we take our dog on a walk, they say keep a short leash so she's not like trying to lunge at anyone or any dog's trying to lunge. We can keep her close by. I think it'll be kind of like that. It's not going to be like 50-foot lead where they're like, hey, like you can reel it in a little bit. I think they're going to work really hard with him in the off season and in training camp. And I think goalie Bob has a task in front of him, and I think he's up for it. Obviously, he's done it before. So I'm looking forward to it because it's the first time the Bruins have had kind of a quote unquote goalie battle, and not, that's not including Swayman. Obviously, he's the number one goalie. That's his net. He's not going to lose that net. But just to see who the backup is, because we haven't had this kind of thing in Boston for a while. Even we had 3 great goalies in Boston when Swayman was coming up, and it was Allmark, Swayman, and Tuukka Rask. Like, well, that doesn't happen. So it's not going to be that, but it's going to be really fun and interesting to see how Korpisalo develops with Boston and how kind of Bussy handles this competition. Because, like we talked about earlier, he's close too. He's incredibly talented, and I think he'd be a great backup. But now it's going to be who's going to be the better backup. But I think that he'll have a longer leash than Korpisalo, which might give him more of an advantage going into training camp.
Yeah, and one thing that doesn't get taken into account that much is this is the first season in, I want to say 4 or 5 years where Korpisalo isn't expected to at least be a 1A. That pressure being lifted off his shoulders could help immensely. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. Goalies find their game quicker than they lose it sometimes, unless you're John Gibson. But I mean, I look at Peter Mrazek, who, working under Jimmy Waite the last 2 years has basically found his game back again. You look at guys like Freddie Anderson found his game back in Carolina again once he got put with a good staff. Like, all it takes is
don't play in Toronto, I guess, or in Ottawa. Don't play goalie in Ontario, I guess.
Yeah,
yes.
Stay away from Ontario. But like you said, just like the support system, goalie Bob working with him night in, night out, getting to see how Swayman plays night in, night out, how he carries himself, how he goes through about his warmups and whatnot. Like for Korpisalo, this is now or never, because it's either you basically grab this backup role by the horns or you're probably getting bought out in the offseason. It's pretty. Like I'm going to be honest. I looked at Pierce. I thought he was getting bought out this offseason. I thought
that's what I thought. That's what they're going to do when they got him. So
yep, I did too. I was convinced. I was like, oh, they'll buy him out or they'll try to flip him for a draft pick or some like smaller like bottom 6 role player. Maybe can just have him in Providence if it doesn't work out. But yeah, I mean, I think that, like you said, taking that pressure off of him might do wonders for him, where he's not expected to be the guy that they rely on. And people talk about the Bruins culture so much. I feel like that is just constantly talked about. It's something that Zdeno Chara helped build almost 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago when he came to Boston. So, and that just kind of carried on after Bergeron left. And now Marchand has kind of, instilled that, and the Pasternaks and, well, not the Brusques anymore, but the veterans who have been there, even, Zacha has been here for a few years now. They just buy in right away. And Swayman reached out to Korpisalo right away when he found out he was coming to Boston. So just to have that chemistry, working on that chemistry right away, I think is important too, where it's like, everyone knows it's Swayman's net. So that automatically he goes into camp like, I am not fighting for a one spot. I mean, he can absolutely go into training camp with that mindset. Like, I'm taking that one spot. That's my net. And maybe that kind of provides a boost for him too. But maybe just kind of taking that, like you mentioned, taking that pressure away from him and being like, you're just here. You're the backup. You know, some pressure, but no pressure to go out there for 45, 50 games. It's just, I mean, that's a lot to ask even of the best goalies out there, but it's when it's somebody who's just continuously struggles, it's like an uphill battle that it's very hard to come back from. So hopefully a fresh start, a really good locker room and good group of guys. And Montgomery is just a really, really good coach. He's there for his players. He wants to be there, very hands-on, and he just listens. So hopefully just kind of that fresh start kind of gets him on the right path. We don't need him to be an undefeated, spectacular goalie. We just need him to be somebody who can be relied upon.
100%. And I know you mentioned earlier, you were talking about how kind of like the culture has been set in the locker room with guys like Char, guys like Bergeron, guys like Krejci, guys who set the tone for this organization. And, Marchand's carried it on and whatnot. And that kind of brings me to my next question, because, Marchand, I think he is going into a contract year, if not this year, then next year. How do you think that extension looks? Because I can't imagine he's anywhere else besides Boston when that time comes. How do you think that extension looks?
Yeah, I mean, Don Sweeney said that they're going to make him a lifetime Bruin when the time comes for him to sign a contract, which is after this coming season. I'd say like 2 years, maybe 3 at the most, or maybe he does year by year like Bergeron was doing. He is 36, so that's technically old in athlete terms. He also had a cleanup of his hip in the off season, I think last month or the month before. Just something, it seemed very minor. Don Sweeney did not seem worried about it at all. And you could kind of tell that the hip was something, I shouldn't say the hip, but like something didn't seem right with Marchand toward the end of the season. And it was probably, being in your mid 30s, and now you had hip surgery, you had major hip surgery, and you're playing a game where you rely all on your legs and your hips. So I think that with him being healthy, he'll probably go, I would say, like I said, year to year. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes, 2 years, and then that would bring him to 39. And then it's like, okay, like, you want to do another year? It's a demanding game. I don't need to tell you guys that. And it's so demanding on their bodies. But I feel like he's going to play for as long as his body is going to allow him to. Kind of like Bergeron. He knew he was like, I was taking way too long to get ready for games. It was difficult for me to get my equipment on. And my body was like, we are all done. Even though he still wanted to play. I think it's just going to be Marchand, same thing. Might be a little more stubborn than Bergeron. I think Marchand will definitely try to push it and be like, hopefully not be like Tuukka and, I don't want his career to end because of an injury, but I can definitely see him pushing it to the point where he re-aggravates an injury or suffers a new injury. And at whatever age he's going to be, late 30s, pushing 40, that's going to be more difficult to come back from. But, you want everyone to go out on their own terms. And I know the Bruins are definitely going to try to make that happen once the time comes. And I know Marchand wants to be here. I mean, he's been here forever. He has kids here. His wife is here. So I think it'll be an easy contract, just like the Bergeron and Krejci ones, 1 year, $1 million, some incentives, have that roll over into the cap for the following year. They can get creative with that. So I think that as long as he's still playing at a high level and being one of the top scorers on the team, I think that they're going to do everything they can to keep him, whether that's like 1 year or 2 years. I don't think they'd go 3 just given his age, but I do think I can definitely see 2 years. And it's like, then we'll go, like open-ended year to year.
100%. I think Joe Pavelski is another good comparison for that. He kind of just took 1 year deals after that initial 3 year extension. I think Patrick Kane's taken that 1 year route. You can see that with the way he's extending. I feel like that's just the way the veterans should be going. I mean, Joe Thornton did it for a couple of years down the line. He was jumping teams though. That's a little different.
Yeah.
But Marchand, like it's wonders what fixing your hip can do for a player at that age. So if it fixes it, like that 65-point pace could easily jump back to 75, 80 with the way the forward depth stacked up with the addition of Lindholm for the power play, which like I don't think it's discussed enough. Like they have a legit bumper on the power play again, which they haven't had since they didn't have last year. I mean, Zacha could do it, but it wasn't really his strong suit or DeBrusk's. But they're just going to have so many options. And if you can lock in your captain for the next couple of years and then have that slow transition to, I imagine, McAvoy or Pasternak taking on the C down the line, it's just a good transition for the organization. And like the way they've locked up their contracts, I really like. I think they have their top 3 defensemen locked up till 2030. That's a good approach. That you can't really, like, it's funny. People always try to find something to complain about with Don Sweeney, but there really isn't much to complain about. Like, I think people were like, I think initially a lot of people were a little hesitant on the Ullmark trade, but at the same time, he got a first-round pick for a goalie. You just do not see that in today's market. It just doesn't happen. Like Markstrom, I think technically got one, but it's the conditions on that
might be in the same range as Boston was picking to begin with. So like
exactly. And I do think it's a little risky to trade him in division. I did think that was interesting.
Oh yeah, because I mean that does make the Senators better in net. I mean, you get a Vezina winning goalie, and you have somebody who's playing he's playing his best hockey, and now he's probably going to be very motivated going there because it's never fun to get traded. Yes,
in a contract year.
In a contract year, you know your kids have kind of built a foundation, and yes, they're still young, so it's probably quote unquote easier to move them at this point instead of there being like 12, 13-year-olds, and you have to be like, oh, do we stay in Boston where they have friends and schools, and so I think that he'll be on kind of a bit of a revenge tour, and obviously people have already marked their calendars for the Senators coming to TD Garden, the Canucks coming to TD Garden, a lot of reunion. I feel like the Canucks got a ton of former Bruins on their roster now. And it's going to be fun. I mean, the Atlantic Division is always fun and it's very competitive. And I like when all teams are competitive. It's like in baseball, when the AL East, when all the teams are competitive, and it just makes it more fun. Do I think that
this year, though.
No. Do I think that makes the Senators a playoff contender? No, they still have a lot of work to do. But I think, if they like what they see with Ullmark, they can extend him. And if he enjoys playing in Ottawa, that's a big win for him. So I think that the Senators saw, obviously, you don't have to go far to see what Ullmark can do for your team. And they played against him plenty of times. So they're probably like, let's get this guy because we're sick of losing to him. So let's get him in net. So they have to beat us now with him in net.
100%. You really think they gotta get that extension done, because if you don't, you're wearing the goat horns this time next year. If Ullmark if Ullmark walks, or worse yet, you trade him at the deadline to try to retain assets, like this would be a third time they've gone big for a big player and not landed. They need to land on Ullmark because the Brinket they missed, Chikrin they missed, and they lost on both those trades on the way out too. So you gotta. That's why I was very interested that trade didn't involve an extension. You would think if he's going in division, they're going to try to lock him up, but hey, ball's in Ullmark's court now. He could rake Ottawa over the coals if he wants. He could look at all those 8-year deals they've been signing and be like, I can take $8 million. I can take it times 8.
Yeah. I mean, the goalie market has been set, and I think, Swayman's going to get paid any day now. We're just kind of waiting for that news to drop, and he's going to probably get $8 million. I'd be shocked if it was less.
And he's
than
worth
$8 million.
It too.
Oh, 100%. He earned every penny of whatever this extension is going to be. He's earned every single term of that extension, especially just the way he played in the playoffs last year. He was never the reason the Bruins lost in the playoffs, and the team didn't bail him out. He tried to bail this team out every single game. And you can only do that so many times. And he showed up. It didn't matter. Even on his worst games, and Montgomery still went to him. That's the confidence that sometimes a goalie needs. And he's like, I am your number one, and I'm going to do this. But yeah, I mean, if Ullmark can, I don't know if Ullmark will get 8 years, but if he can, I'm sure he'll try, especially if he has a good season, or he has a really strong season in Ottawa. He already has an advantage. But if he has a strong season, oh man, I hope the Senators don't screw this up, because I want Ullmark to have stability, because he's a good guy. He's obviously a good goalie. And I just don't want the Senators to mess with him the way they've messed with several other players.
Yep. Yeah. There's the track record's strong in that market. That's for sure.
It is.
And that's why I really hope he gets what he deserves, whether it's compensation or whether it's, finally getting that legitimate one, like getting to be a number one, which I don't think he's been able to do the last couple of years. But I don't think he's going to complain about. Like, he and Swayman had a really good thing going as the
You got a
tandem.
Vezina trophy out of it, yeah.
Vezina out of it. It's the best goalie in the league. Like, pretty sweet life.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah, but so I guess my final question would be, all cards on the table. Where do you think Boston finishes in terms of the Atlantic Division this year? Because I have a gut feeling it's around the 2 or 3 seed again. Just depends on.
They're definitely in a divisional spot. I could even see them winning the division, especially if Florida has a cup hangover. Like, it's such an open division for me, but I could see the Bruins finishing first, honestly.
I can too. I'm gonna put them at 2.
That's fair, yeah.
Because I thought maybe the Panthers would have some sort of. I know they didn't win 2 years ago, but just some sort of hangover from going to the final, like they were exhausted by the time they lost to Vegas, and just kind of having a shorter off season. It's very, very hard to go back to back in the finals. And so I was like, maybe they'll have some sort of kind of lag, and they never did. Maybe they will this year. They're not bringing back the same roster they did in their cup winning season. So, but they're still a strong team. They're still a very good team. Paul Maurice is a very good coach. And they still have, the Kachucks, and even Evan Rodriguez. He was fantastic for them in their playoff run. So I think that the division is theirs to lose, and I think the Bruins are strong too. But I mean, you never know. Hockey is a very crazy sport where we saw
there's 82 games.
There's 82 games. There's all these teams fighting for the cup, and it's a fun, fast season. And I think at any point, the Bruins were in contention for the division last year. It was going back and forth until the last game where they figured out where they were going to be playing in terms of their seeding, who their opponent was going to be. I think it came down to the second to last game or the last game. So that's what makes it fun. Makes it a little bit stressful in terms of like trying to figure out when the game 1 of the playoffs is going to be, but those are first world problems. But it's just, I think that with the improvements they've made, I don't see them lower than 2. And a lot of people were out on them last year. They thought that they weren't a playoff team, or they would just kind of sneak into the playoffs. And they certainly didn't. And now with them filling the holes that they definitely needed in this offseason, I think that became stronger. They became a more difficult opponent. And if they make it to the playoffs, obviously, like that's the goal. And it's the goal to get to the Stanley Cup. But I see them as a really strong finishing second in the Atlantic.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
It's wide open for that. I feel like, especially with, I don't think Toronto answered their forward core in the way that they probably should have. Like you said, Florida is probably the biggest threat in the Atlantic right now, and then it's just that second cluster of teams where which one of them's finally going to break through that glass ceiling, whether it's Buffalo, Detroit, or Ottawa. So,
yeah, Detroit's right there.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they do, I don't see them, like, they're probably wild card or maybe third at best. I don't know if they're up there with Boston or Florida trying to win a division. If like Detroit, Buffalo, or even Ottawa, I think Montreal's taking a step, but yeah.
And then Tampa's always hanging around.
Oh,
so.
Tampa, yeah.
They're always just very annoying to play against, and they're also very tough in the playoffs. So and anything can happen in the playoffs, and it's anyone's game once the playoffs happen. The regular season does not matter. The Bruins beat the Panthers 4 times in the regular season. So, that means nothing now going into the playoffs. So it's always fun, especially with teams like Tampa that, like you said, do just kind of hang around. Detroit's on the cusp, but they've been on the cusp now for a couple years, and I think they're finally going to break through. And it's just, it makes the division, it makes the league a lot more fun when you have this competitive hockey throughout the entire season.
100%. It's going to be an exciting, it's another one of those seasons where I don't think there's a clear-cut favorite for the Cup. Like, obviously, people can say Florida can easily repeat, but that's just, it's so hard to repeat in this league. And
oh, yeah.
I'm not even going to, Tampa repeating was great, but it's also such a freak situation and how it happened. They played the Blackhawks 8 times in a season. The second time they won a cup. That's never happening again.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Gary Bettman will make sure that never happens again.
Yeah, never again. But it's just like this. It's a good position for Boston to be in, and they basically prolong their window at least another 2 years. I feel like, which is something that was in question for a little bit, after
Yeah.
they got eliminated from Florida. It was, what direction are they going to go? And, I think Pierce and I always had faith Don Sweeney had something up his sleeve, whether it was a trade or, signing who they signed. But they've set themselves up for great success over the next couple of years. I'm very in particular excited to see where Lindholm slots in particular and how much chemistry he's going to have with Pasternak, because I feel like that's a match made in heaven with their play styles.
Oh yeah, I think so too. I think fans are in for a good treat with them as teammates. And you mentioned Don Sweeney. As much as people like to give him grief, whether it's how he drafts, other contracts he's given out in the past, I mean he's made a lot of really smart decisions for this team the last few years. And I think it goes back to deciding not to extend Torrey Krug, and he gets that huge deal in St. Louis, and unfortunately it hasn't worked out, and now he's in danger of missing the season. And I feel like ever since then,
that up with him and Pietrangelo.
Oh yeah, they're another team where I'm just like, whatever. Like, full offense to them, just like full offense to the Ottawa Senators, full offense to the St. Louis Blues,
especially as Blackhawk fans. Yes, full offense to the Blues.
So I think that he's gotten so much better over the years, and just being able to, whether it's get these contracts done, even just kind of, I don't want to say manipulate the cap because that sounds deceiving, but like when you get those Bergeron and Krejci contracts, you didn't have to pay those bonuses until this past year. So just like small things like that, where you go all in. Trade deadlines are really good for him. Contracts are good for him. So it's been good. I feel like I have a lot of faith in the Bruins because Don Sweeney is the general manager.
Yeah, it's crazy. The teams that are like always in on the big names are the ones that are always consistently making it. Like the number one example in the NHL is obviously Vegas. They've got a cup out of it. I always feel like Tampa and even Colorado are in there trying to get any big name they can, even if they're not going hard after. They're always mentioning, oh, this player's available. They're in this sweepstakes, and I think I would place Boston in there too. Every deadline they make a move, whether that's Taylor Hall a couple of years back, Hampus Lindholm, and there's been some swing and misses. Like I think one year they tried to get Rick Nash and that didn't work out too well. But then
that was a bummer.
You get a Charlie Coyle, and he's been here long term, and and not only do they make the trades, usually the players they trade for they keep long term too, which I think is huge.
Definitely,
and,
you don't see too many rentals.
Yeah, and I feel that Bruins fans complaining about Don Sweeney. I feel when you have a good team, you got to find someone to complain out. So you kind of just nitpick at everything, especially if you're a Boston sports fan.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I'm always interested by teams, whether that's in hockey or other sports, that are able to keep the window open for so long. And yeah, there's probably some moves you can critique of Don Sweeney, but the fact this team has, for 15 years now, just been competitive year in, year out. Even I think the years they missed the playoffs, I think they only missed by a few points. Like they were never bad bottom of the barrel. And I think the one year they missed the playoffs, they got Charlie McAvoy. Like, oh no.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Like, oh no, it didn't work out. Like, it's all worked out in the Bruins and Sweeney's favor the last few years. He's nailed a lot of those trades. Even the rental trades, the Bertuzzis, and he wasn't even a rental, but then Pat Maroon, like that was somebody they desperately needed, someone like him for the playoffs. And, it didn't work out, but it was still somebody that I would still make that trade day in and day out every time again.
Yeah, and just like wrap up my point, like looking at the team, like you got, I would say, a top 5 goalie with Jeremy Swayman. Again, if the Olympics or whatever, 4 cup or like the 4 teams tournament started today, I would probably have Swayman as the USA starting goalie at the moment. Defense, like Charlie McAvoy, again, legit number 1 defenseman. Then you just got guys like Lindholm and Carlo and Zadorov as that, Mason Laura as well. And then I look at the forwards, they're deeper than last year. And like you got the superstar with Pasternak, Marchand, again, not as good as he was, but still very effective. And then they even have some young guys coming into the system. Like, yeah, you don't have any legitimate top end prospects, but like Fabian Lysell can make an impact, in Matthew Poitras. So I think that just speaks to Don Sweeney. Obviously he didn't pick things, he hasn't been perfect, but he's done such a good job of, working with what he's got. And I'm looking at, their cap situation right now. Like they do have money that's probably going to get tied up in Swayman, but I think once the trade deadline hits and teams will, you get a third team in there and do pretty much anything to to retain salary, I think the Bruins are going to be a big player for whatever big names are out there. So we're always, especially Dylan and I on this podcast, are always interested to see what Don Sweeney's doing. I think that's our cue to wrap it up here.
The Sunday scaries creeping in.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, yeah, that's all I got. I don't know, Dylan, if you got anything else, we can wrap this up right here.
No, it's all good. Pleasure having you on as always.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm always happy to come on. I'll talk with you guys, whether it's Blackhawks, Bruins, St. Louis Blues, and Senators. You know, we can do it all.
Senators Hate Club. It's my favorite.
Yeah.
Print the shirts.
We're gonna get hats too.
Love it.
Yeah, Lauren, thank you for coming on, and yeah, we'll definitely have to have you on another time, maybe come the trade deadline if the Bruins making a huge move or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, always happy to come on. So thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you.